Let's just talk a little bit about what is the ACI dealing certificate. What's the aim behind it? So the reality of this program is that the ACI organization, especially, for example, the foreign exchange market, is not really regulated, right? So what these guys are saying is, in most instances, if you use equities as an example, I mean, these days, just to get an entry-level job in the equity space, you need the equivalent of a CFA as an example, right? So what they are trying to do, and that's why there's a predominant focus on foreign exchange and money markets, is because those markets aren't really as regulated as one would imagine. They're trying just to create a standard in the industry so that it's almost like a self-imposed standard by its members to say, listen, everybody who wants to join a dealing room in a bank or a trading area or a trading support area within a bank, let's make sure that everybody has the same basic competency so that in dealing with each other, so amongst the banks, but also in dealing with clients, that there's a level of professionalism, knowledge, everything to avoid mishaps, as an example, right? So that we can function as a fully functional system, and everybody, for lack of a better explanation, plays nicely with each other and with the clients. Okay, so the exam itself has become quite an important process of most dealing rooms globally, and especially across Africa, where this is kind of the substandard now that not just the dealers, but even the sales agents, the support functions, and everybody that is involved with the front office type business are required to have this qualification as part of their ongoing education. So in terms of the exam itself, it's not really a difficult exam in that sense because it's 2 hours, but they've simplified the exam quite a bit. There used to be a subsection focusing on the model code, which they've subsequently removed. So there's really only 70 questions that you now have to answer, and they've given you 2 hours for these questions. So that's nice and a really decent amount of time that you have available to answer these questions. In order to pass the exam, I'm just muting, there's a bit of feedback on the line. There we go. So in order to pass the exam, they need, sorry, give me one quick second. In order to pass the exam, they would require you to have a pass level of 60%, which means out of the 70, it's around about 42 questions, I would imagine. And then the only tricky part is, even though they require you to pass the overall exam with 60%, they do require you to, even for every single module in the exam, you have to pass that with 50%. So the point just behind that is you can't score 90 on one and 30 on another and then still pass the exam, because they want to make sure that for all the basic modules that they've grouped the various topics into, that there's a minimum of 50% understanding of each of those baskets of the various topics that they cover. Okay. The good news for the exam is that you don't have to remember any of the formulas. In fact, one of the documents that you can download in the online platform is a formula sheet. This formula sheet is also readily available on ACI's own website. And that sheet is the formulas, all the formulas that they will test you on or use, what you'll need to use during the exam to answer the questions. Now, you're not going to take the formula sheet with you in the exam room. What they have is these exams are all electronically done on a computer. So there's a little pop-up menu that you click on, and it shows you all the formulas. So what's required of you is just to understand which formula needs to be applied where. Okay, so at least that's half the battle won, that you don't have to be nervous and sitting there memorizing formulas like we used to do in school before big tests, right? So that makes life nice and easy. Okay, so in terms of the topics, you'll see there's 9 different baskets, or topic baskets as they call them, and we're going to be covering practically all of them on the webinar. I just want to say maybe section 8 and 9, asset and liability and principles of risk, because those don't really have a lot of calculations or product specific details to them. We've grouped that for the last session, because I want to make sure that if we need time, if you guys are struggling with something specifically, that we can spend the webinar sessions at least to make sure that whatever the calculations or the product specific questions gets a little bit of precedence, because Like I said, the stuff on asset and liability is almost like history. It's something that you read and it'll make sense. There's no real calculation or interpretation that's needed. But just as you can see here, the bulk of the questions that you'll find will come from foreign exchange, and then the product related forwards, FRAs, and money market swaps, and so forth. So you'll also see that for every single section is what I referred to in the previous slide. The minimum score requirement that you need to have is 50%. Okay, so at least it's not a tricky paper, but you need to make sure that you understand a broad body of knowledge in this instance. Okay, so like I said, the exam technique is very easy. It's a multiple choice scenario. Now, I know out of experience that multiple choice is not always as easy as it sounds, even though you can just guess if you don't know. But quite often the problem is that there would be questions that might have more than one answer, in your opinion. So the trick is to always choose the most relevant answer that you think. And if there's really a problem that you didn't like the answer to, make a note that when we're done, you can maybe just send and challenge the question itself. But on the most part, I don't think there's going to be any issues with regards to that. The exam technique to follow is just make sure you answer all the questions. Even if you don't know the answer, a simple guess at least gives you, let's say, a 25% chance of getting it right, that particular question. Like you see here, you've got 1 minute and 40 seconds per question. That's quite a lot of time, especially if you consider that not all the questions will be calculation type questions. So for the ones that are calculation type questions, you want to make sure that you build in a little bit of fat in the other questions where there's a quick answer, that you can save some of the time up just to do the calculation. So it's still relevant to spread your time and manage your time wisely.